Hi, ladies and gentlemen. We're here at the Hank Cisco show. And just for those people that have been calling and asking about Hank, he's doing well. I believe pretty soon he'll be back in here doing his show, and it'll be animated as ever. And Hank, if you're listening to this show, just remember, you never lose the fight in the dressing room. So get out there and continue fighting. Anyhow, we're here today with Monsignor Joseph Nicolo from St. Helena's Church in Bluebell Center Square. And they have a very special date coming up. This is the 100th year anniversary of your parish and your church. So,
Right.
Monsignor, give us a little background about St. Helena, who she was, number one, how she got canonized, and about the church and how it got founded.
Okay. St. Helena was the mother of the Emperor Constantine. And Christianity could not be practiced openly under the Roman Empire. And so in 324, 325, they passed the Edict of Milan, which allowed the faith to be practiced above ground. Helena was Constantine's mother. However, her life wasn't necessarily an easy one. She was from a special family, and she was also a waitress at a local place to eat. And when Constantius, Constantine's father, who was a military officer, was off on his war, he met her, fell in love with her, married her. But he was interested in his career. And the Emperor of the East's son died that left the daughter-in-law. And he said to Constantius, to marry my daughter-in-law. He divorced Helena. She was banished. But in time, Constantine came up the ranks, became the emperor, brought his mother back, and she became an empress. She founded the True Cross in Jerusalem, Holy Sepulchre, which is the basilica there in which Calvary is, and the empty tomb, and also in Bethlehem, where Christ was born. She founded those places and brought a lot of the different things back.
And ultimately, Constantine converted to
He
Christian.
became a Christian, yes.
Christian. So tell us about how exciting this is. 100 years.
Right.
It must have been back Bluebell back in those days. Center County must have been all farmland. So tell us about how it came to be.
Very different. It was called Center Square, and Cardinal Doherty felt there was a need to find a parish. And so outside of Norristown, St. Helena was founded. It was 50 square miles, and it was 25 to 30 families. Father Higgins was made the pastor. However, the area wasn't so open to having Catholics. And so for him to find a place to celebrate Mass, to find a place to live wasn't so very easy in the beginning. But a friend of his mother, Mrs. McCluskey, allowed them to use her home. And then in time he met this Ellen Duddy, who was a Catholic, who had a farm of more than 95 acres. So when he asked her, could he say Mass at her farmhouse, she was so delighted, she said yes. She gave him 2 acres. So they were going to build a church. However, 3 years later she died. She gave all 95 acres to the church. And so that's how it all kind of started. But it was very few people. As they say, on Sundays there were probably more chickens around the church than people at times.
And how many people are there today? How much?
Well, 100 years later, we're about 100 times the number of families. So we're over 2,500 families in the parish.
And you have school, and you have...
We have a school, and the school is a pre-K3 and a pre-K4, K to 8th grade.
You know, the interesting thing, both of you and I both went through the Catholic school system, although I did graduate from Cheltenham High School.
Right.
But I remember my years in Catholic school back then. I believe you went to Cardinal Doherty.
Right.
And that at one time was the second or one of the largest inner city high schools anywhere.
Right. It was the largest Catholic co-institutional school in the world.
For the students that may listen to this, what was co-institutional meaning?
It's one school, but one side of the building was for boys, the other side of the building was for girls.
Oh, I remember those days well.
And school day did not start for the boys the same times as it started for the girls, nor did they get out at the same time.
That's an interesting background for the, I remember very well the nuns at the dances when we got together. The nuns would cruise the gymnasium where we would have the dances, and they would make sure we were like, respectable, dressed right and everything else.
Right.
So things have changed. You have a great website, by the way. I looked at the website, and there's tons of information on it, the events and everything else. And I noticed there is a keynote speaker coming up, Mr. Murphy, was his?
No, there's coming as Mr. Matthew Kelly.
Matthew Kelly.
Right.
And he's speaking. And so anybody who wants information, the website is, as I recall, St. Helena Center Square.
The easiest way to do it is simply put in St. Helena Church, Blue Bell, the search. It'll come up because it's a little complicated to...
Yeah, it's a little long website,
Yes.
but it does get done. Again, we've talked about St. Helena. We talked about the church. One of the other things that's really great to talk about is, again, how Catholic education has changed over the years.
Right. When I went to St. Cecilia's, I grew up in Philadelphia. So I went to St. Cecilia's in the Fox Chase part of Philadelphia. And to give you an idea, in the 7th grade, there were more than 105 of us in one classroom. Half of the class was 8th grade girls. The other half of the class was 8th grade boys. And Sister Georgine Marie, who was our teacher, taught us both. And it's amazing we learned. But as you know, there was discipline.
Big difference in discipline back then.
You know, there was it's just...
The old ruler.
Well, I'm not sure of that.
Well, I remember it well. I remember it well. They kept it under control very well because I didn't have as many kids in my class as you did, but we were pushing 52 kids.
Right.
And it was always exciting to see how our dear nuns kept everything under control. And great. So right now you're expanding the schools. You're redoing a couple of schools right now.
Well,
a couple of classrooms.
Well, the thing is that, first of all, the Sisters of Mercy came to St. Helena's in 1948. The convent was a farmhouse across the street from St. Helena's. So when the school started, the convent, living room, 1st and 2nd grade, dining room, 3rd and 4th grade. In 1949, the school opened from K to 6. And then in about 1952, the upper school opened. And then in the 2000s, we opened up a pre-K 3-year-old and pre-K 4-year-old program.
So you pretty much have it all covered at this particular. And how many students do you have in the classes today?
About 500. Oh, how many in the school?
In the school.
There's about 500.
500.
Yes.
Interesting question. Are there
size much smaller in class? Children.
Right. That's true. I mean, that's all changed in many of the in schools today. The other thing is, are there any people who went to St. Helena's schools way back when, who are still in the parish, or any old timers?
Oh,
there?
Absolutely. But most interesting, up until June, the principal of our school was Sister Kathy Schulberg. She was from the Norristown area. She went to St. Helena's grade school, and she was the principal of St. Helena's school for about 30 years. When she was in the 1st and 2nd grade, she saw them expanding the school to the upper grades.
Right.
And then she was also there when we expanded the school. For example, this is the 3rd church that we have. The first was a little wooden church. The second was in between the 2 wings of the school, and then the present church. But what was in between the wings of the church, between the wings of the school, is now 6 classrooms, 2 4th grades, 2 5th grades, honors math, and a science lab. But we then ended up extending the building, adding another building in front of the school, to make an independent library, computer room, art room, etc.
To keep it relevant in today's
Yes.
society and everything else
Yes.
like that. One of the things that's always been important to me in the classroom and everything else has been the different things that have occurred. Now, you mentioned one thing, that it was very difficult for Catholicism. There was a lot of animosity to Catholicism back in the turn of the last century.
Right.
I remember, grew up in Immaculate Conception Church Parish in Jenkintown, and they had a beautiful wooden church, and in the 1920s, the Klan actually burned it down.
Right.
And so we all experience this. One of the great things, and you can agree with me or disagree with me, but one of the great things about America is, with all its warts and everything else, and all of the different prejudices and everything else, and we've all faced it. Italians have faced it, Irish faced it, Polish faced it, African faced it. We've all faced the prejudice that occur.
Right.
We've overcome that, and we've moved so much further. Even in my lifetime, in your lifetime,
Right.
in the 1960s, we've seen so much changing in time. So I'm very proud of our country and what we've overcome, and there's no place like it.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned. One of the things I do remember is how we look at this, and of course you're a religious leader in the Catholic community, but in schools today, obviously you talk about God in your school because it's a religious school. But in many of and I went to public high school, I graduated from public high school, there was that, how do you teach morality, discipline, something more than the state? And that's, really important to take a look at that as a nation, because we have to believe in something more than the state, because we know human beings are corrupt by nature. And so we have to believe in something bigger than us. So how do you deal with that in your school?
Right. Well, we don't have that problem as much with the school, because God is...
Excuse me, but your students are going to have to face that when
yes.
they get out.
God is an everyday person in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
When your life sees him as the ultimate, then all that you do is supposed to reflect that. And the beauty of our schools is that you can say that out loud. I think that when you separate it, then there's really no good reason for them to, when you say, well, you should act in this manner. Well, why? These is what God revealed to us, that we're to live a higher life. And I think our students learn that, and so that equips them to go out into the world. Sometimes you get to the upper grades and everything's departmentalized. Mm-hmm. You do this subject, you do this subject, you do this subject. Unless they integrate it, there's a problem. We're able to integrate principles with the teaching.
And I think that's important, which is somewhat lost in
Right.
trying to be so politically correct. And I can understand that, but at the same time, we have to bring this sense of morality, whatever you want to believe in. But there has to be something where the relationship between people, helping each other, doing what we've done in America, overcome all our human failures that we have, and overcoming them and making things better than it was before. Do we have a long ways to go? Absolutely.
Right.
But we are a very unique country when you think about all the different personalities and people existing here.
Yeah. It's kind of important that people listen to each other. There's a tendency today to cut people off. There are a lot of people of goodwill, but unless you listen to them and you have a dialogue going back and forth, things don't work so well.
But isn't it true that you may have a different idea than I do, but if we sit down in a rational way and discuss where you're coming from and where I'm coming from, maybe something over here grows out of it that's better than both those ideas together. But unless we can have that conversation,
Right.
without calling each other's names and everything else,
Right.
we're never going to hear that other idea.
Right.
And I think that's where we lose it, by taking this perfectly political
Yeah.
correct way.
We can think differently. That doesn't mean we don't love each other. It doesn't mean we cannot live together. I mean, if everybody was a basketball player, who's going to make the food we eat? I mean, we're all different. We have different ideas.
Different talents.
We have different talents. And all of them is for ultimately for the good of all.
A couple other things that we wanted to get into is let's see, what special events are you planning for the 100th year? Now, the 100th year anniversary is October
Yes.
2019 of this year.
Yes.
So everybody who's listening, put that in
Right.
your calendar if you want to
Right.
participate. What are some of the events that you're
Okay.
going to be doing this year?
Well, we've been working this for a year in advance of the 2019 October. So what we did is we wanted to have a pictorial directory of the parish on the occasion of the 100th. We started that in August, September.
So these are old pictures coming.
These are pictures of parishioners presently and taking pictures and everything of the present ministries and everything.
Be great to have some pictures of the old school kids and now where they are
Okay.
today and back then.
Right. Well, what we've also been doing is we've been taking pictures of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and we have a TV in the narthex of the church, the vestibule part. We've been showing those pictures from those years on the TV before and after Mass. And then afterwards, we did for example, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Pictures of those days, and then the 2000s. So we've been doing that also. One of the things that we just had is over the weekend, because it's the Valentine weekend, happy Valentine's Day, to people. But we had the renewal of wedding vows at all of the masses. But what we did in conjunction with the 100th, we were asking the parishioners who are married 50 years or more to please let us know. And so what we did is...
By the way, that's a great idea because I want to know the secret of that. The 50 years.
I tell you what my father said when he was married 60 years. A friend of mine who's a Lutheran minister said to my father, Mr. Nicolo, what is that magic ingredient? He simply turned to Pastor Michael and said, yes, dear. Yes, dear. So, but the thing is that we had that, and then we invited them we have a room under the church we call the Empress Room in honor of St. Helena. And we had invited those who celebrate their 50 plus years of marriage and their families for refreshments and everything like that after the Mass. And then each of the gentlemen got a boutonniere and each of the ladies got a long stem rose. Very well received. Those married 50 more years really enjoyed it. And one of them were married 65 years.
Yeah. The interesting thing about marriage is that you really, when you love somebody, you really have to let them be who they are and accept the whole person for who they are.
You don't marry them for who you're going to make them. You marry them for who they are. And together you build on that, making each other a better person.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I think that's one thing I learned through my parents. My father had the greatest respect for my mother.
Right.
And he was an old world Italian. I don't have to tell you about old world Italians, I'm sure.
Right.
But he had the greatest respect. And the other point was my father, beyond his, given the era that he was in, he made sure all my sisters had opportunities going to college and everything else, which was really, he pushed education on us in a big way to make sure that we were the best that we could be.
Yeah, education was a big part of our family life. My mother went to commercial school, that's 2 years of high school. My father was an excellent student, but only went to his senior year. But everybody else, and they used to check your homework.
Oh, yeah.
There was no such thing as, we have no homework.
Yeah.
And they would correct it and everything. But education was very big. But another aspect, getting back to what we were doing, is we had a contest for the grade school children of St. Helena's and the prep. Now that's children who go to public school but get religious education. They were to design the front page of the bulletin. And we would then, so we had several hundred entries. And so we are running the church bulletin. The front page has been changing. We're using the pictures that the kids came up with as part of the celebration to get them involved in the 100-year anniversary. And in the 20s and 30s, religious pageantry and processions were very big. At one point, St. Helena had a procession of saints. There were 1,000 participants. There were 40,000 people came to watch it. Mind you, in the 30s, cars were not as plentiful as they are. They came by train, they came, by car, people came by foot. And so this Palm Sunday, we're assigning each grade, like first grade, there's a boy saint and a girl saint, a man and a woman. They're to study it and then to dress as them. And we're doing it throughout the school. And then on Palm Sunday, we're going to have a procession involving the children to try to bring back some of the pageantry that happened in the 20s and 30s at St. Helena.
Yeah, I can remember those ceremonies when we were in grade school where
Right.
everybody participated, and you talked about the history of the events and things like that.
Right.
It's really important to understand the heritage of these
Right.
things. So where is St. Helena going in the future? Where do you see Catholic education, the whole idea of religion, because it seemed to be somewhat poo-poo today to a degree. I mean, for me personally, when I look at the universe and I sit there and scratch my head and say, why are we all here? You have to realize there's got to be something much
Right.
bigger than us
Right.
in control of this thing.
Right.
And but where do you see the future of
Right.
education, Catholic education, and religious education as a rule
Right.
in the country, and where you?
Okay. Well, our country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. So our foundation is rooted in God. And I see religious instructions, be they children go to religious ed because they're in public school or children in our Catholic school, needed to be rooted in their faith, because that's how you end up being a good citizen. Mm-hmm. A good citizen is someone who brings out the best and gives it to the world. So we are more than a body. We're a body and a soul. So it's the physical and the spiritual aspect that Catholic education addresses.
To bring out what's in our
Yeah.
hearts to make it work.
Right.
So,
And to show them that they have to be compassionate and loving leaders. In imitation of Christ, who reached out to all, to the sinner, to the saint, to them all.
mm-hmm. Well, I think in our leadership that heads our different, our townships and everything, they're community people, and if these people have some kind of conscious feeling about what's morally right and how they
Right.
want to be treated, I think we'd all be better off to a degree, that it's all
Right.
not by the numbers, and you can't think politically correct all the time. You have to challenge things at times, because if that were the case, we'd still think the world's flat, basically.
Right. People have to listen to each other and love each other. Not everybody's made in your image and likeness. We're made in God's image and likeness. So we're not all the same. We don't all think the same. We don't all act the same. But we should have a moral compass that leads us in the right direction, that lifts people up.
So a couple other things that we wanted to get into is the, let's see, we talked about the website. Again, the big date is October 29th. October 29th is
October 2019.
2019.
Throughout the month of October, we have a number of different events.
And you're open to anybody who wants to learn about the history of the
Correct.
parish, or wants to do anything. That's
Right.
the time to investigate these times on it. Let's see what else we have on notations. Anyhow, it's been really wonderful to have you here talking about something I always liked talking about, was my education. By the way, here's something I wanted to ask you. When did you become an altar boy?
Second grade.
Second grade. So I can remember being an altar boy. When I went to Angela Academy, it was mostly girls there, so a whole lot of boys.
Right.
So we got tagged in becoming an altar boy in the first grade, and I can remember trying to read Latin in first grade, and it was all by memorization. But the height of my religious career was I actually one time got a chance to be an altar boy in the Vatican. I had gone to Italy to visit my cousin who was learning to become a lawyer, and ultimately became a judge in Italy. And while I was there, I met an American priest who was studying, and we were talking about altar boy, and he said, "How would you like to be my altar boy?" And I'd say, "Great." And I said, "I would love to do that," because, as I say, I loved history. So I got the opportunity to go to the Vatican, and I was able to be an altar boy at the tomb of St. Peter.
Right, okay.
Which was very exciting.
Under the main altar.
Under the main altar, and that was really the height of my career.
You know, another point that's kind of interesting about St. Helena, in the very beginning, it was also known as the Shrine of St. Teresa. And during the war, people in Norristown and Bridgeport used to process up what is now 202, barefooted in processions to pray that their children or their spouse would come back from the war alive. Mm-hmm. And at one time, the original church had many memorabilia of people who were cured of an affliction. And it was very much known. And when I was assistant at Holy Savior in 1974, it was called St. Helena's. Nowadays, the people say St. Helena. It's the accent, it's just on a different place. But interestingly enough, old-time Norristown people say St. Helena's. People now basically say St. Helena's.
In wrapping up, is the shrine we
still have the statue from the original church, which is in our chapel now, which is dedicated to the little flower, St. Teresa. And we have a novena prayed there weekly too.
Yeah, I know in the Philadelphia area there's a number of very specific shrines. I know there's the Immaculate Conception Church in Germantown, I believe.
Yes.
That is has always been a very popular religious shrine to go to. So that's another little bit of history that people listening to this show may want to tap into and see that. And in closing, just want to again talk about the website. Just go to St. Helena Catholic Church in Center Square or Bluebell.
Yes.
Sometimes I think it comes up a little bit better when you do Bluebell. If you want to go the long way and you want to write this down as I remember it, it's St. Helena's, the word Saint spelled out, Helena Center Square .net. I believe that's the website. I believe that's the website. But you'll find it. And the big date again is October 2019, this October, for the big 100th anniversary. And I know I'm going to be there. And Hank, if you're listening, just remember, in keeping with the religious aspect of this, if you walk on water, make sure you look for the rocks. So thank you all for listening.